Hi, and welcome to the Restorative Wellness Clinicians Corner, a video series exclusively for functional health professionals, where we interview the top experts in the latest research, products, tools, and best practices for getting your clients exceptional results. Welcome, everybody, to today's episode of the RWS Clinicians Corner. I have been so looking forward to today's conversation. We have Diane Koehler with us today. Diane and I have known each other through the nutrition community now for several years. She is currently the owner and director of Nutrition Therapy Institute, or NTI, in Arvada, Colorado. And so we have been operating in these kind of parallel spaces of training health professionals in the field of nutrition. And we actually have many of Diane's alumni in our Restorative Wellness Solutions program. And it is a delight and honor to have her here with us today. Diane has been a leader in the field of nutrition education for 15 plus years. Under her guidance, NTI students are empowered with science-based curriculum that enables them to help make a difference in the world by sharing what they know about nutrition and wellness. Graduates of NTI are known to be highly skilled and knowledgeable, making them well positioned to meet the increasing demand for holistic nutrition professionals. And I can tell you, we see this firsthand because her alumni simply excuse me, choking on myself here. We see this firsthand because her alumni simply thrive in the RWS program, which I will say is very demanding, and not all training programs equip their students with the skills ready to go deep the way that we like to. So we've been very impressed with the quality of the practitioners you turn out. Diane, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you for those kind words. It is really important for us to have our students and graduates be at a really high level of knowledge, because it's so critically important when you actually want to go out there and help make a difference in the world. So, yeah.
It sure is. And I would say our clients' health conditions and health situations are not getting easier.
No. Definitely not. Not easier and not declining in number either. So
I know there's no shortage of work. When people say, oh, there's so much competition, I say, no, there's so many people who need our help.
I know. I say the same thing all the time. Yeah.
So we're actually going to talk about something that has affected you really personally.
Yep.
You have shared with me that you've been watching your mother's devastating decline with cognitive issues, with incontinence, and with mobility challenges. So can we start off by just, getting a little personal here? And can you share a little bit about that experience with us and how it has shaped your perspective on aging?
Yeah. So I will just start out by saying that I think that on one side of, the coin or something, there is this kind of implicit expectation that people's cognitive decline decreases as they age, and maybe even dementia. There is some sort of normal aging process that results in dementia. And, we all joke about, senior moments, and someday I'm going to be, walking around not knowing what I'm doing and not be able to recognize my family. And it's kind of a joke, right? When you're young. But on the other side, no one believes that will actually happen to them. And, the rates of dementia, and dementia is a broad, is a broad perspective of different types of cognitive decline, with Alzheimer's disease being the major one. But the rates of dementia are increasing, and it is shocking the number of people who are expected to have dementia. I'm horrible about just recalling off the top of my head statistics, but somewhere there's some statistic that by 2050, so that's what, God, my math.
25 years.
Yeah, 25. Yeah, right. 25 years. Some huge number, like 30 to 40% of those over 65 are going to be experiencing dementia. It is huge. And my mother started experiencing some recognizable issues with her cognitive function. And cognitive function is broad. It is memory, yes, but that's actually just a very small part of the cognitive capacities that people have and start to lose as they go through this process. So she started experiencing symptoms and signs that I could recognize, I would say probably about 10 years before her initial medical evaluation that gave her a diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, MCI. And that was probably about 7 years ago, 5 to 7 years ago. The timelines really honestly have just escaped me because it's like such a day in, day out, like every day something else happens and I lose track of time. But so she started experiencing some things about 10 years prior, and I would make comments and, Mom, I think you really need to take this seriously. And I tried, I sat down with her at her kitchen table and spent like a couple of hours trying to do as good a job as I could about talking through, some dietary things and some mechanisms behind cognitive decline and all these kinds of things. And she put on a show of what I now recognize was her putting on a show of like, oh, you're so nice and you're so cute and thanks so much for all your help. But she didn't really take me seriously, and she didn't believe me that I was noticing these things. And she was just like, oh, I'm just going to humor her and I'm going to just like whatever, humor her. And she didn't take me seriously. So she didn't initiate any of the things that I recommended, and I gave her a whole list of things and she didn't implement anything. The more decline she started experiencing, she was actually, I also know now, she was actually getting worried about it because she was doing, what she would call those silly things like getting lost when she was driving, or, buying things at the grocery store and like putting the ice cream in the cabinet rather than in the freezer, and she would just say, oh, I did something silly, and, like kind of blow it off. And I was putting that on my list of, yep, like this is another sign, And so then she did start asking me, well, what was that you told me? Like, what were you talking about? What was that? But then she got to the point where she wasn't actually capable of making the changes. And that happens. You eventually get to a point where you may have the desire to make changes, but you don't have the cognitive capacity to actually implement the things that you are trying to do. And so, she just kept progressing. And then when she got her official medical diagnosis, her doctor was noticing some things and sent her in to get evaluated. And she got her initial, as I said, first diagnosis of MCI, mild cognitive impairment. Again, she didn't believe it. She's like, they don't know what they're talking about. And she, used some colorful language to describe the people who were doing the analysis. And then 2 years later, they sent her, and she's living independently all this time. They sent her again for another evaluation, and she got an official diagnosis. You have Alzheimer's, right? And again, so this was 2 years after her initial MCI, and this time you have Alzheimer's. And again, they don't know what they're talking about, and and it's all based on taking these mini mental tests. I forget what the acronym is for it. and you can find them online. You can take them yourself and do it online. And, they give you this questionnaire. Usually it's 20 or 25 questions. They give you this questionnaire, and depending on how many you get right, and it's, recall, it's like name 5 animals, and then 5 minutes later, name the 5 animals, and drawing a clock, and other things. And it's all based on how many you get. So initially her score was, 23 out of, actually at that point, I think it was 23 out of 28. And that gave her MCI diagnosis. And then she went down, and her next evaluation was 18. And then her next evaluation was 15, so she kept declining and declining and declining. And now she can't even get 1, like she's, 0. But, but all along she was like fighting and arguing, and like, they don't know what they're talking about. They don't know what they're talking about. That's what she was saying. That's what she was doing, sort of, to put on a show. But, when eventually I had to move her, and when I cleaned out her house, she had all these books, brain health, what to do about brain health, all this kind of stuff. But she was at the point where she was not capable of reading and understanding what she was reading, and actually being able to implement any of that stuff. And so, I mean, her decline has been fast, and it's been tragic and scary at times. And I mean, even I just keep thinking, like, just wake up, just like snap out of it. Come on, snap out of it, because the things that she says and the things that she does are so baffling. You never would even expect that that anything could come out of that person's mouth or actions, because they are so illogical and so like bizarro world. Like, everything is bizarro world. And here's the thing. Her memory is not her biggest issue. She knows me. She knows her grandchildren. She knows her first grade teacher. She knows, her brother and her family. And she knows things that happened to her in college and all this kind of stuff. She knows that stuff. Her cognitive decline is she can't read and understand what she's reading. She can't, like, now she's at the point where she can't do zippers. She doesn't know how to tie her shoes. She doesn't know how to, do basic hygiene. She can't take care of herself physically, and all of her hygiene. She lives in a memory care center now, and she doesn't understand why she has to be there. And it's like this constant problem. Right. And every day things happen that I am just shocked by. She gets into like crazy scenarios with residents, and it's just shocking. And so this is the story. And I mean, I could go on, and I apologize. I do go on.
Well, I want to take a step back, because one of the first things you said here when you were talking about this is that you knew, we do think, when we think cognitive decline, I think the first thing that most people think of, including practitioners, we think of memory, right? And we think of, whether it's forgetting where you put something or forgetting directions or some of these things, but we think of that sort of cognitive piece or the memory piece as the most significant. And you said, like, you knew the signs to look for, and it wasn't memory, it was all of these other things. So for the clinicians listening in here, can you help guide and provide some of the clues as to what people should be looking for? Because I think this is going to be helpful for them with their clients, but also to help coach the loved ones of clients to be paying attention to in their family members.
Right. Yeah. So, big ones are loss of ability to manage finances and kind of like day-to-day decision making, but finances is a big one. My mother stopped paying her credit card bills because she was just like, yeah, I don't have to pay those because I don't want to pay them. Like, I don't want to have to pay for the things that I buy. So I should just get things for free. I mean, this was her logic. Like, it makes no sense, but this was her logic. So she stopped paying her credit card bills. Also, like, I know we make fun of older people who have trouble with technology, and I will be the first to admit I'm not a huge fan of technology, but the technology that I understand and that I use on a regular basis, I get. Like, I know how to use all the things with technology. And so it's having a level of understanding with technology that you have used and experienced, but then losing that capacity. Right. Like learning new technology, that's a whole other thing. That's like get your grandkid to teach you how to do it or whatever. Get your kid to teach you how to do it if it's a new technology. But losing capacity for technology that you already had at one point, but then you start to lose that, that's a big one. Also, as I mentioned, like the kind of losing your keys, can't remember where I put my keys, that kind of stuff, that's really insignificant. But it's, you go to the grocery store and you buy a bunch of frozen food, ice cream and frozen meats and, whatever. And then you put them in your cabinet rather than in the freezer. Right. Or, not turning off the oven or turning off the shower, like letting the shower run all day long. Like, right. Oh, why is your shower running? Oh, I don't know. Well, when was the last time you took a shower? I don't know. Maybe this morning, I don't know. So, stuff like that. What
about
the other thing? The other thing she did is she forgot to feed her dog. She had a dog, and she would forget. She would go days without feeding her dog or forgetting to feed her dog. But then she would, in the wintertime, she would put her dog out. And then forget to let him back in. And, in the middle of winter, he's this little dog and he almost froze to death twice because she forgot to leave him in. So that is a memory thing, but it's also like it's like a life process, thing.
So it's more than just, remembering the details. And you mentioned also some of the things, like you said, some of the things that come out of her mouth now seem to be so foreign. I think there's also an aspect of personality changing, correct? Is that something you noticed in the early stages, or has that been more later stages?
No, definitely agitation and just getting kind of agitated with the world. That is something that is much more common for her now than it was. She really hasn't experienced a lot of major personality things, except for the agitation and yeah. But that is definitely something that does happen. It just hasn't happened. I think each situation is going to be individual, but that hasn't been a major thing for her.
So having gone through this experience yourself with her, and you shared, the frustration that you've been trying to get her to be acknowledging this. Now, you are her daughter and you're also a practitioner. So there's going to be a necessary dynamic there where, our family are sort of the last people to listen to us, right? But yes. What have you learned through this, and how do you coach your practitioners in being able to have these conversations with clients? Because these are very sensitive issues. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people are not, oftentimes it's not even, well, let me organize my thoughts here. Oftentimes it's a family member who's coming for help. And at that point, there can be, there can be a point where it becomes very difficult to turn things around, where it's almost too late, right? Mm-hmm. And then it becomes a question of how do we engage our clients before this even happens to understand mm-hmm. the importance of paying attention. And we'll talk about the what to do's about it in a moment here, mm-hmm. but how do we have those conversations to get people, in my personal clinical experience, and I don't work a lot in the cognitive decline space. I work with people with autoimmunity primarily. And one of the things that I've noticed is that people are often unwilling to do the hard work that requires, behavior change is what we're in the business of. We're talking about diet here, but ultimately it's about behavior change. And that's really hard to do when there isn't a compelling reason. Mm-hmm. So our our challenge as clinicians is how do we have the conversations with people before the diagnosis? Because in the case of autoimmunity, okay, fine, you've had the diagnosis, it's going to take more time and more work, but we can turn it around. And I find clients are highly motivated. But in the case of somebody like your mom, by the time they're able to confront it and recognize it and understand it, we might be slipping into that too late. So how do we recommend like navigating those conversations?
Yeah. This is definitely challenging. And honestly, I don't have a great track record. I was not able to get my mom to be convinced that I was accurate in my assessment. And I think a lot of it has to do with your relationship with, and it usually is going to be a family member. So your relationship with that family member. And, my mother and I have had a lot of challenges in our relationship. And I think that played a role in why she was unwilling to listen to me. So, but I think that, I don't know, like, I kind of feel like I'm a little harsh maybe, but I kind of feel like the scared straight method can be beneficial to kind of like explain to them what the real consequences are of not taking action early. And, right now, I think that if you were to walk into a memory care center and, there's different standards and different ways that they exist in different states, I'm quite confident of that. And so here where I live, memory care centers are, it's a range of capabilities, but there's a lot of people who are like vocalizing all day long, like yelling and crying and screaming out, I need help, I need help. And it's not, they don't need anything. There's attendance there. Like, so it's not that they're being left unattended. And a lot of like people walking around catatonic and not being able to communicate and like trying to get out. It's a locked facility. So constantly trying to get out and the alarms are constantly going off. And it is not a pleasant place to be. And so, like go volunteer or just witness what the end result is going to look like. That to me is motivation. Personally, that to me is motivation. But I just think, it is a very sensitive issue and people don't want to admit that things are going wrong. There is a stigma about, admitting that you have some sort of, whether it be mental health issue or cognitive decline issue, there is stigma around that because when you have cognitive decline, things get taken away from you. Your car keys get taken away, your car keys and your car get taken away, your independence gets taken away, your home gets taken away. And it is truly a taken away thing because someone who has cognitive decline can't make those decisions. The kids make it for them and then the kids get blamed for it. But and so you do lose a lot by coming to that admission. And so I think there is also something in explaining to the loved one that I know that this takes a lot of courage to acknowledge that this is happening. And, a friend of my mother's several years ago told me that getting old takes a lot of courage. And there is something to that. And so acknowledging that, like, this takes a lot of courage. And if you can muster that courage, we can do this together. And they also need to know that you, the family member, that are there for support, and are there to help them. And, if you don't have the skills and the knowledge because you're not a practitioner, someone who's not a practitioner will seek out a practitioner to help them. but I think, acknowledging that it takes courage and committing to be there for support. It is hard to be there. I'm going to tell you right now, it is very hard to be there and walk alongside with this. It is so incredibly challenging. But so I have to commit to that as well.
So I want to shift the focus a little bit, because when we were first chatting about coming and talking today, you were sharing that you've seen these interrelationships between these things that don't seem to have anything to do with each other. We commonly associate them all with aging,
yes,
but we don't think of the interrelationships. And so we've talked a lot about the cognitive decline piece, but then the incontinence and poor mobility. So talk us through the interrelationships that you're seeing between these pieces.
Yeah. So incontinence and poor mobility have a lot to do with one another. There definitely is direct ties between incontinence and poor mobility, because incontinence is not just about your pelvic floor muscles. It's about your hip muscles and your hip rotators and your hip flexors and your hip extenders. All of those are directly connected to how well the pelvic floor is functioning. And when you are missing the mobility, the full mobility of your hips, that starts to impact and create the decline in the pelvic floor muscle function. But once and I'm going to be stereotypical here and talk about women. Because I think it is more common for women to have incontinence. I don't know that to be statistically true, but that's what I think I see when I look at it. And so one of the easiest ways to sort of have this weird psychological spin is, well, if I don't drink anything, I won't have to pee as much, and then I won't, be peeing in my pants when I cough or when I laugh or when I move. Right. And so they stop drinking water and stop drinking fluids. And of course, once you get dehydrated, that dramatically, so dramatically affects brain function and cognitive function. The number of times that my mother has been hospitalized just because she is dehydrated, I can't even count. And it greatly contributes to then the cognitive decline. But then also, there's this list of 6 or 7 primary risk factors for cognitive decline, and lack of movement, which is influenced by lack of mobility, is a major risk factor for cognitive decline. If you can't move and engage your body to move through your life and through your existence because you have poor mobility, that also directly contributes to cognitive decline. And I'm not saying that there's a direct causative factor, but there definitely are associations between these things. And then as people start to lose their cognitive capabilities, then they can't, say to themselves, I'm going to go for a walk. They just don't have the capacity to initiate that movement on their own. Also, when people are incontinent, they don't want to move around because movement makes them lose control of their bladder. And so there are so many ways in which these things are interconnected. And I call them the 3 menaces of aging, cognitive decline, incontinence, and lack of mobility. And so my work that I do in this particular area and what I teach, and I speak in all kinds of different situations, is that you have to look at these three things together because they are definitely intertwined. And so that's, just off the top, what I would say is the ways that these things are interconnected.
So if we're looking at that, let's say we're working with a client and we are wanting to get ahead of this, well ahead of this. Maybe they're starting to just show the early signs. Maybe they're already just wanting to be preventative. Maybe they have witnessed. And I think that's actually one of the most powerful things is when we witness a family member go through this, that determination of like, is not going to be me. So maybe they have been in that situation. What kind of recommendations are you making for them preventatively or, you know, in those early stages to start turning things around to be able to address these three pieces? I'm assuming you're going to be recommending movement, but let's talk about like, are there dietary strategies that you're bringing in? What lifestyle strategies, like what are some of the key pieces? Like if your mom would have been receptive 10 years ago when you first started noticing these things, what would you have done and what do you do now with clients?
Yeah. So I think that it's really easy, particularly for people who live alone, which is my mother's situation, to not eat well and not eat a nutrient-dense diet and get into the habit of eating the same thing over and over and over again. And that same thing tends to be very nutrient deficient. And so obviously, as a, nutrition therapist, my base, my foundation is always going to be in nutrients and understanding how nutrients influence brain health and brain function. And so, I think that, I think there's a lot of good evidence for doing lower carbohydrate diets. And because we know that so many people they eat such a high carbohydrate diet that they've got all kinds of insulin resistance and all kinds of poor energy metabolism situations that I think is a critical issue, is just being very cognizant of not eating too many carbohydrates such that you're causing some sort of blood sugar dysregulation. Getting enough protein. It is so easy for people to not get enough protein. I mean, I just, when I see clients and I look at their food journals and, I very rarely see on people who aren't like worried about long-term cognitive health, they are not eating enough protein for so many benefits. There are so many benefits to eating adequate protein, and they're missing out on all of those, not just the influence on their cognitive function. And then, there's the simple micronutrients like B12 is so critically important. I'm sure your community is really aware that when you look at the symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency, you look at a list of the symptoms of vitamin B12 deficiency, it looks exactly like the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. Like they match, like mirror image, and it's like, well, doesn't that tell you something, right? And so B12 and choline and creatine and vitamin D, these are such basic, like people are surprised to hear that just basic nutrient deficiencies, the massive impact that it has when you've got years and years and decades long deficiencies in just basic nutrition. So, I mean, those would be kind of my, things that you need to make sure to include, and then things to avoid, inflammatory foods like lots of sugars. Obviously, we all know about that. Refined seed oils, heavy metals, like those would be things that I would be encouraging people to pay attention to in their diet, of things that they should avoid or reduce or do whatever you can to address those issues. And then lifestyle things like sleep deprivation. So chronically elevated cortisol levels are known to cause hippocampal decrease in hippocampal size. It's known to cause hippocampal shrinkage. And so, obviously we can talk about stress and all the kinds of things that people get stressed about, and relationship and financial stress and all that kind of stuff. But the thing people forget about is that sleep deprivation is truly one of the most impactful stresses. Like, it is, that is why, well, I don't know. There's a whole bunch of really solid evidence that sleep deprivation is one of the biggest contributors to chronically elevated cortisol levels. And so, doing all those kinds of things to manage sleep and improve sleep, all the sleep hygiene stuff, and being serious about prioritizing sleep, I think, is critically important. So those would be some lifestyle things. Movement, I think, is absolutely necessary. It's so easy for people as they age and they retire from their jobs to be like, I'm gonna take it easy for a while. I'm gonna, relax and take it easy for a while. And that ends up looking like you sit in front of whatever device, whether it be a TV or a computer, for hours and hours during the day, and choose you choose not to be physically active. And, I think whatever the statistics are for movement, it doesn't have to be going to a gym. Walking, like outside walking, is critically important. And a lot of people say, well, what if I'm just going to do my treadmill for 2 hours a day or whatever. The problem with treadmill is that you are using your feet and your hip muscles, hip extenders, hip flexors differently on a treadmill than you are when you're walking on ground. And that can impair the ability for pelvic floor muscles to work properly. So there's that. But the other thing is that there's this thing called optic flow, where visually, when we are walking over ground and seeing in our peripheral vision things go by, trees and cars, but things are going past us visually, that is a major complex computation that our brain has to perform in order to accommodate all of that movement and all of those things. And there's some interesting research that shows that is so critically important for maintaining optimal brain function and balance. It works together to help with balance and brain function, to have that optic flow is what it's called. And so that movement outside, and you're outside getting access to sunlight, and vitamin D plays an important role. So there's lots of benefits there. But just maintaining flexibility and that ability to have full range of mobility is so critically important for cognitive function, as well as for pelvic floor function, for incontinence. And so, I have a practice that I do daily that to maintain flexibility, maintain my ability to have full mobility, full range of mobility in my hips and my feet and my knees. And, that is something that I prioritize in my own life and that I talk about with my clients and anyone who's interested in learning about that, because I'm so passionate about it.
Slightly a related but slightly different topic. Are you looking at any kind of biomarkers to help guide both diet as well as the lifestyle interventions and any kind of supplementation? And if so, what?
I think that the only biomarkers that I would be paying attention to are methylation SNPs, because methylation, the methyltransferase enzymes, PEMT, which is the pathway for producing choline, and then I think it's GAMT, which is the pathway for producing creatine. Together, those two pathways use up some, and I've seen it differently, but each of them are about 40 to 45% of our full methylation capacity is used up. And so together, they use up about 70 to 75, maybe 80% of our full methylation capacity. And so if you have SNPs in those two pathways, then
the PAMT and the GAMT.
Yes. Then, and choline and creatine are critically important for brain function. Creatine is critically important for muscle activity, and which is important, which relates to mobility. So SNPs in those two areas could really dictate how important you need to rely on dietary sources, and really at that point supplementation for both choline and creatine. But even if you don't have SNPs in those pathways, I have SNPs in PEMT, but not GAMT, and it doesn't mean that I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna ignore that, I can just rely on my own pathway for creatine. I think everybody should be worried about getting adequate dietary creatine and choline. And the thing about that is that so many people make choices to avoid the foods that are high in choline, which is egg yolks, liver, soy, not my favorite one, but egg yolks and liver. People don't eat egg yolks and liver anymore. I do, but a lot of people don't. And then creatine, really only provided by animal foods, and so many people choose to avoid animal foods. And I think that can be problematic, even if you don't have SNPs in those two pathways. So those would be, not necessarily biomarkers, but genetic markers. In terms of biomarkers, I don't put a lot of weight in biomarkers, and I just because I think a lot of people, they don't want to do all the testing and that kind of stuff, and so I'm just like, all right, fine. Look at the foods that you're eating. If you're not eating the foods that are the most reliable sources of these nutrients, then you either need to add those foods or you need to supplement. Because if you're not eating them, you're not getting them, and that means you're deficient. And while you may not have signs of that deficiency right now, the cumulative effect of being deficient over years and decades is not a good one.
Yes, absolutely. I think that earlier that you can get ahead on these things. I think if somebody was to be thinking about looking at biomarkers, even running a blood chemistry panel where you're looking at things like, sugar handling. You talked about the fact that diet tends to slip very significantly. Looking at inflammation markers, looking at, you could look at homocysteine for a sense of the methylation capacity. I think these are really important things. And I agree. I think regardless, supplementing with, a good methylated B, a creatine, some choline, there's some of the, and a good all-round multi even with some of these things, there can be so important as, understandably, if somebody is living by themselves and they don't have the interest in cooking, they might not want to be, trying to get all of this. And it's hard when you're by yourself, especially. It's definitely a lot more challenging to cook a varied diet because you don't have all the people to eat the other servings with you, right?
Yeah.
And so I think this can be a really important strategies. I just want to check here in with the chat. We do have a couple of questions here. Ellen's asking, how do you get care for somebody with the signs, but the brain scans aren't yet showing anything, so they can't get treatment covered? Any recommendations on that?
Again, it's that's a challenge, but diet and lifestyle, you don't need insurance coverage to deal with diet and lifestyle. And really, diet and lifestyle are the most impactful ways that you can address and have an influence on any kind of health condition. And those are never going to be covered by insurance. And well, I don't know. I don't know. Maybe someday they will. But so I think once again, though, it just comes down to recognizing that there are things and acknowledging and there is research out there that diet and lifestyle strategies do have a major impact, and you don't have to have some sort of observable, measurable imaging or test that gives you a diagnosis of a disease. You can take steps way before you get to that point. And actually, you should be taking steps way before you get to that point. Because once you get to the point where things are observable, whether it be in an imaging or, some sort of testing, that's kind of, you're walking a really fine line, and you're on a major tightrope where the fall is much harder, because it's really hard to come back from that once you get to the point where something is diagnosable. So,
Clinician's Corner podcast is sponsored by Restorative Wellness Solutions, the premier clinical training program for health practitioners who want to learn how to finally get to the root source of their clients' health concerns and help them reverse complex health challenges and chronic illness. You can't afford to keep guessing. Your clients can't afford it either. Today's clients are sicker than ever before. Their health histories are more complex than ever before. And you simply can't deliver the results they crave or build the practice you desire without the right clinical skills. Enter Restorative Wellness Solutions' foundational course, Mastering the Art and Science of Gastrointestinal Healing. Our clinically proven, systematic approach to restoring balance within the body that has helped over 1,000 practitioners transform their clients' lives, grow their business, and change the way health is delivered. In less than 12 weeks, you'll develop the clinical skills and confidence you need to help your clients feel better, faster. Learn how to work with advanced lab testing to identify food sensitivities and imbalances within the gut. Craft custom targeted protocols that truly resolve your clients' gut issues, and work safely and effectively with supplements to deliver consistently life-changing results. Visit masterguthealing.com to apply today. I have a comment here from one of our live audience, Belinda, and I want to add a question to it. She shares here, Alzheimer's as type 3 diabetes, those cravings for sweets seem to really take over in many people as they age. And as someone is suddenly alone and doesn't want to cook for just one person, they might end up with Ensure or Boost. I know that I've seen that been recommended by family members, and it's always devastating because it's mostly simple carbs. And as she points out, maltodextrin has higher glycemic index than sugar. So what would you recommend as some simple strategies for these types of individuals to encourage them to eat real food, but to do so in a more doable way so that they're not ending up with the Ensure or Boost, but they're not also feeling like they're preparing these really complicated meals for themselves and themselves alone? Like, do you recommend meal delivery programs, or like what are some of the strategies that you've used to help them through this?
Well, sure. Yeah. Meal delivery programs are, I think, the best thing you can do, or if you have a relative who you can cook for, but also, finding community where you can say, 3 times a week, we're going to eat at a different person's house. And that kind of gives you the motivation and a reason to cook, because, you want to participate and have that community experience. So that's one thing. If someone is unwilling or unable to do that, then I think meal delivery services are obviously the best way to do that. You just really want to make sure that the person who you're hiring or recommending for the meal delivery service, that they understand how to prepare meals with nutrient density in mind, and that they're not using bad oils and they're not using, poor quality ingredients. And And there is going to be a cost to that. You know, if you're paying someone to cook your food and you're asking them or needing them to use high quality ingredients, there's going to be a cost to that. And so that, you know, requires an understanding and an acknowledgement. But, you know, just for cooking for yourself, you know, like if you can figure out the easiest way to get the biggest nutritional impact in a small, easily preparable meal or thing, like, you know, get down to the, like, just the very basic minimal thing you can do to get the biggest nutritional impact you can. And I hate to pound on this, but organ meats is like one of the best things that you can do. Like for me, if I'm cooking for myself because my husband is not here, I will buy, you can buy, there are a couple of brands locally here where I live, and I'm sure that they're available, you know, in other places, or other brands are available where they have like a ground beef product that is ground beef, ground liver. Sometimes it'll be heart and sometimes it'll be kidney, one or the other, or both. And I will mix some of that up, and I'll put in some kale and, you know, some red pepper or something like that. And that's a meal. And that is, it covers so many bases. And I feel so confident that I am providing a large range of nutrients for myself in something that is really quick and easy to prepare, and I make enough that I have leftovers. I can eat it the next day and not feel concerned that I'm, you know, having repetition of the same thing for 2 days in a row, because that thing is so incredibly nutrient dense. And a lot of people don't like hearing that organ meats are very nutrient dense. And I know you know this because I know you have experience with organ meats. It is such a powerhouse, and I recommend organ meats all the time, and people are just like, oh, that's so quaint and so old fashioned, but it's true.
Well, I cannot. My husband will be so angry if I don't take this opportunity to say, or you could use pluck. Or
that's true.
Seasoning to just
that's true.
Things.
That's true. Absolutely.
So that the people who are squeamish about organ meats can get some of those nutrient benefits. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's actually the big joke in our house is he's like the organ guy, but he won't actually eat them. I'm the one who eats all the organ meats. Yeah. But that's part of the reason why he created pluck, was to be able to help people who don't want to actually eat them, but want to get all the nutrient benefits that what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think what you're sharing here, it really comes down to, you know, supporting that individual to find, it doesn't have to be this whole diverse menu, but a handful of meals that they really like, that are easy to prepare, that they can do, you know, I can think when I'm now, of course, you know, I'm a mom, I've got the kids, I've got all the people to feed. But when I take myself on these like mama only vacations every once in a while, where I'm just like in a cabin for 4 days by myself. And one of my favorite parts of it is just the cooking, right? Because I get to eat my favorite things, and I'm fortunate in that I both know how to cook, and that the foods that I enjoy are very nutrient dense. But, you know, there are very simple ways that with not too many different ingredients, you can actually have a nice little variety of meals. Sure, some things are going to be repetitive a little bit, but I think supporting that individual to find those key meals that they can use, that they can repeat, that they're not going to get sick of. As you said, they're already typically eating the same things. It's just they're typically eating things that are not nutritive and too high in the things we don't want them to be having. So I think there's some great strategies here. We've got a couple. We're going to need to end in a few minutes here, but we got a couple more questions I want to make sure we get through from the chat. So Diana asks, can you speak to menopause and Alzheimer's and brain health and how to support women in our practice going through this transition? And we know there's just this like wild decline cognitively for, lucky us, for women as we go through menopause. So any recommendations here?
Yeah, I mean, estrogen definitely and progesterone are definitely important hormones for maintaining optimal cognitive health. And so I think understanding, like doing Dutch testing and understanding what your hormone metabolism pathways are. That's important. Knowing what your estrogen levels are, pairing a Dutch test with a serum test, knowing what your estrogen and progesterone levels are, I think is important. And there are dietary things that there is knowledge about ways to increase estrogen levels. Maybe not so much dietary things for progesterone levels, but knowing what those are. And then, there are ways that we can access some hormone support. It doesn't have to be pharmaceutical hormone replacement products. There's some good topical products out there for hormone support. And, I don't think that there's a need to be using these products to get hormone levels back to premenopausal levels, during our peak reproductive years, but just having a little bit can be beneficial. And these hormones are not only beneficial for brain health, but also for bone health. So I think looking at those types of products, and, I don't know if you allow product names on here, but, I think Quicksilver has a really great product line for topical hormones, both estrogen and progesterone. And you can self-dose them. You can, you'd want to be making sure that you're testing and, everybody in your community has access to testing. It's really easy to get access to testing. But using those just kind of as a little support, I think those are good products. There's a couple of other brands. Ona's Natural has, it's hard to find, it's more difficult to find topical estradiol than it is to find topical progesterone. So Ona's Natural has a topical estradiol, and then the Bezwecken products are estriol, not estradiol. But I think that there is benefit in looking into getting some support for hormones.
I would agree completely. And I would footnote and underline what you just mentioned is you need to be testing alongside that, whether it's for your clients.
Absolutely. And making sure that you're doing the Dutch test to understand your metabolism pathways.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Last question from Diane. Are you able to share? I knew that someone was going to ask this. Are you able to share the mobility program you follow daily? She has a family member slipping into reduced mobility and would be great to have something simple to share. Is that something that you're able to share here? Or maybe is there, I don't know if you have a video or anything like that?
Yeah, no. So I learned about a biomechanist. Her name is Katie Bowman. I learned about her in 2013 and started following her work and doing her programs. She's got, I don't even know how many books she's got out there. She has a lot of online stuff. And then she's got a membership program. And her program is the one that I was attracted to when I started doing this. And it's just what I have continued to use. There are many, but I like Katie Bowman's.
That's excellent. Yeah, I know her work well.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, how do folks stay in touch with you, Diane?
Yeah, well, so they can go to the NTI website, ntischool.com, and then my email is diane@ntischool.com. And of course, we've got this information is included in our curriculum, which we've given a discount for the first course to your audience if someone's interested in doing our curriculum. But those would be the ways to reach out to me. And, speaking of technology, I don't do any of our technology, so I actually don't know what our social media handles are, but they're all there on our website. The little icons are there on our website, and I sent something to you, so I'm sure you'll be posting those.
We'll make sure to.
I actually don't know what they are.
No
Something NTI school.
Sounds good. Good. Well, thank you so much. It's been really informative and helpful. And just sending you love and light as you continue navigating this with your mom. I know it's not an easy journey.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for having me. It was fun to have this conversation. I really like talking about this. So.
Okay. Thank you so much. And thank you everybody for joining us tonight. We will see you in a couple of weeks.